Could you kind of describe an overview of KFC's development strategy and how it's changed since the start of the pandemic?
Sure. So, Joanna, in the U.S., our development strategy really is focused on a number of areas. First and foremost, we want to have a modern, relevant brand presentation to the consumer, right? So, a contemporary and inviting design is always part of what we're putting forward with our assets from a development strategy standpoint. We want to be accessible and convenient to the U.S. consumer. So that means being everywhere and every place and every occasion that the consumer might want to access KFC. So when you talk broadly about development strategy, it's looking at where are we not penetrated today in the U.S. and where do we have those unmet, unserved consumers or occasions where we can build out the brand. You're seeing that through our new unit development, certainly. And part of the new unit development is certainly the traditional freestanding drive-through, kind of our bread and butter, if you will, for QSR. But you're also seeing KFC expand in everything from non-traditional venues like airports and captive type of venues to what we call alternate format assets. Think of things like an urban inline that doesn't have a drive-through, or a end cap drive-through that might be part of a shopping center development. So we're starting to have more and more asset classes to help our expansion plans as we go forward. We've got a significant runway for growth in the U.S. We certainly believe we've got a path to growing over another 1,000 restaurants, getting back over 5,000 KFCs in the U.S. And then lastly, another big part of our overall development strategy is the existing 4,000 KFCs that we have. And we've been on a tremendous pace with our franchise system, remodeling and upgrading our existing KFCs. We're happy to report we have now over 2,500 of our American Showman design. So almost 2 out of every 3 KFCs in the U.S. now have that new contemporary design from a remodel standpoint. So that's a good mix look of the things that we look at from an overall development strategy.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd love to speak a bit about those urban inline restaurants. Kind of what is your strategy there, and how does that play into the next generation stores?
Sure. So in the context of that overall strategy, when we look at the U.S., we recognize that the urban core of the U.S. Is an area where we're not as penetrated as other parts of the U.S. So from an overall growth strategy, we know that to meet that goal of being accessible and convenient and meeting the consumer where they're at, we need to expand in those type of areas as well. There's a tremendous amount of population density, as you can imagine, in the urban core. So there's a lot of population that is not seeing KFC or having KFC accessible and convenient to where they live, work, play, et cetera. So for us, the urban expansion strategy is to be able to penetrate those type of trade areas with an asset class that works for the consumer, that works for the franchise operator, and also produces a financial result that's a win for everyone involved. So these are typically going to be obviously non-drive-through assets, although every now and then you'll see us get a drive-through in the urban environment. And with that, they have a very different channel mix. Drive-through is the predominance of a suburban freestanding KFC mix. So in the urban asset class where you don't have that drive-through, the consumer focus and the operator focus is all about how do we have a little bit of dine-in, but also a heavy look towards delivery and what we call quick pickup, where you can place an order, come in and grab it on the go in that urban environment. So it's a very different mix, a very different type of asset than a freestanding drive-through would be.
Yeah, for sure. And what are your goals for opening, numbers wise, for opening those urban stores?
Absolutely. So we've got a pipeline of a handful this year. We'll build a similar next year and get some learnings with our franchise operators as well as with the consumer on how those assets are performing. And then we certainly expect to accelerate from there. I mentioned earlier getting back over 5,000 restaurants. We easily see the urban opportunity as in the hundreds of that next 1,000 restaurant, just given our penetration level across the U.S. So it's a tremendous opportunity for the brand going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that one of your target markets is Queens. I'm in Queens, so looking forward to seeing that. And so how do you think that these new types of stores, you mentioned a few different, like in airports and a few different types of stores, help to meet the changing needs of the consumer?
Absolutely. I think again, when we look at these type of asset classes, it's typically a very different occasion and a lot of times a different consumer base. So if you think about something like an airport, you're there because you paid for a ticket and are traveling. So you're in essence a captive consumer, meaning your choices are only what's there in the airport venue, right? So that occasion and that consumer need state is very different than the suburban dinner time, grab a bucket and go home type of occasion. Similarly, in the urban environment, again, KFC is not as penetrated in the urban environment. And typically when you're talking about, we good?
Yeah, continue.
All
Sorry
right.
about that.
So, and certainly in the urban environment, that also is a very different consumer occasion and potentially different consumer demographics. So if you think about urban, we're talking high population density, high foot traffic versus vehicular traffic. Often in an area like Manhattan in the boroughs, you've got bus lines and subway and rail lines and those type of things. So all those traffic patterns and that digital delivery access to the density that might be there, as well as more of a grab and go type of consumer occasion, just leads us to a very different need state. And that's what we're working towards with the learnings on the urban inline asset. We think there's a very underpenetrated, untapped consumer in those environments that frankly, if they don't have a car and there's not a KFC for miles around, they're not able to access the brand the way that suburban America can. So it's a way to bring the brand to that consumer and to that occasion or need state that's out there.
Mhm. For sure. And when I think of a KFC, I feel like I picture that drive-through. I picture being the suburban, the family, maybe the soccer mom that's like that's going through the drive-through to pick up dinner. I don't necessarily picture commuters in the city. So I feel like there is probably some white space that you guys can explore in those urban environments.
Absolutely. And you know New York better than I do. When you talk about different areas in Manhattan versus the different boroughs, and even within the boroughs, you've got very different consumer patterns and consumer demographics that you're working through. That's the other exciting part for us is not only is it a underpenetrated consumer and a underserved need state for that consumer, the trade areas that we're talking about in the urban core are typically also going to be more diverse, younger than the KFC typical consumer in the US. So from a relevant standpoint for the brand, it's also bringing the brand to a much broader spectrum of the US population, which is part of what we're doing overall from a brand standpoint to drive our relevance and convenience across the US.
Mhm. And so the big question here is how will technology play a role in these new store formats?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really exciting time for us at KFC. Earlier this year, we launched our own .com platform as well as our KFC US app, right? So we're at a place now where we've got the technology in place across the US platform to really grow our learnings and accelerate the digital footprint of the brand as we go forward. So if you think about how that then plays into the urban asset class, where you don't have that drive-through that's the predominant channel mix. Now we've got the technology foundation in place, integrated with our back of house and POS platforms that the consumer can access any major delivery aggregator and place a delivery order, or they can come onto our .com platform or through the app and place a pickup order. And what we're doing with quick pickup is exciting, as we optimize the order pickup flow within the restaurant, the consumer is able to come and just find their pre-packed product ready to go, hot and fresh, with their name on it, and leave without going through the normal, order pack process. So it'll save the consumer time once they're at the restaurant as well. So as you think about that going forward, that type of digital integration that's tied into our ordering systems, our inventory systems, our operating systems is going to drive operational efficiency and speed. That also then allows us to test next generation technology for KFC at least We're testing interior digital menu boards, for example, in the urban formats. We're testing kiosks right now as well as another order pickup placement. So you can see as the integration continues, the digitization and the integration of that technical capability within the asset has a role broadly for KFC, but certainly in that urban asset class, we think it plays a big role.
Mhm. And I think that makes sense because I don't know about other cities, but in New York, you don't want to walk. You're always in a rush, right? So you want to walk
Right.
in and be able to know, like, oh, I placed an order, so I know immediately where I need to go to pick up that order. And I feel like reducing that customer friction when they walk in and knowing where to go is kind of the key.
And the delivery aggregator driver or walker or riding the bike is the same way. You know, I had a recent chance to visit the market a couple of times, and we spent some time in existing KFCs where the technology and process is already in place for quick pickup. And you know, the local restaurant general manager and the local restaurant team, they get to know the aggregator delivery drivers that are working in their local trade area, right? So even in the context of delivery, where you might think of it as a company doing delivery, it all becomes very local. And just like they know the customer, they know the delivery person for their restaurant. And the delivery drivers love that they can come in, find that delivery order, grab it, and leave because it gets them onto the next commission, the next trip as well. So it works on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, for sure. And so how do you think this development strategy will help to modernize KFC as a brand?
Sure, I think as consumers see our new designs, see the new products that we have with the KFC sandwich and original recipe fries, as they see the technology integration, and they see the brand growing and opening new restaurants, especially in these urban environments where we've been missing for a number of years. The more and more of that we do, the more the consumer is going to see KFC as a growing, thriving brand, and they're going to see all those modern elements, everything from the asset design to the menu to the technology integration. So it's all 360 going to drive a more modern, relevant feel for the brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's picture KFC in a year or 5 years. What are your goals for these new stores and penetration in these new markets?
Yeah, I think when you talk 3 to 5 years down the line, I expect that we're still growing. Freestanding drive-through is our bread and butter. As you well know, being active in the space and talking with many concepts, drive-through has been a big performer for QSR through the pandemic. We've gotten even better operationally and efficiency-wise on that. So I continue to see us grow our pipeline more and more and more from a freestanding drive-through standpoint. But I think you're also going to see us go from pilot to expansion test to then these pipelines of urban or non-traditional that I'm talking about start to accelerate and play a bigger and bigger role for us as we go forward, as those areas are less penetrated in the U.S. than the freestanding drive-through type of trade area. So there's more growth ahead for us in that 3 to 5 year range in those type of channels for sure.
Definitely. And so, as you mentioned, drive-through has, of course, been huge, and I feel like a lot of brands, a lot of companies are kind of looking at maybe their footprints and thinking that they'll roll out smaller footprints and drive-through focused and kind of technology focused. Do you think that these updated smaller store formats with a focus on to go are here to stay?
I think they're here to stay, but I think the way that we're looking at it is more open and more flexible. So it's not a one size fits all. Similar to the urban occasion or the non-traditional occasion, we think that different asset sizes and different trade areas have a different dynamic. So we launched late last year our next generation KFC prototype designs. We've got a pipeline in progress for those first ones to come out of the ground this year. And that's going to be a variation. We've got everything from what we call a drive-through Delco, which is drive-through delivery carryout, so no dine-in, which is a small, just over 1,300 square feet prototype, which is very small for us. While we're also building the number of traditional drive-throughs with dine-in that are a bit larger. So I think from a KFC perspective, we think that dine-in will still play a role in the future. It'll just play potentially a different role and maybe a bit smaller role, but we're going to have a flexible lineup of assets as we go forward that helps the franchisee meet the investment profile of the trade area and the dynamic of the consumer and traffic in the trade area, because it's not a one size fits all in our perspective.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I think flexibility is the name of the game, and you really want to be able to meet the different occasions of the different customers that you have.
That's right. And I think we've also seen that, trying to go too prescriptive to one asset class ultimately inhibits and limits your ability to grow, right? There's a lot of areas where you wouldn't be able to get the size of real estate that you need for a larger dining asset with a long drive-through stack, but that smaller 1,300 plus square foot prototype you might be able to fit on a relatively small piece of land that allows you to penetrate a trade area that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. Conversely, as I think everyone has experienced, as things, presumably open up as we go further and further forward, we're still of the belief that the consumer ultimately comes back for dine-in in some state. And there's plenty of trade areas in the U.S. where the franchisee is going to want to have, access and a dining room for that type of consumer so that they can optimize the sales in the trade area for the investment they're making.